With her husband's body growing cold beside her and her unborn child kicking frantically in her womb, Sarah Thornton stared into the eyes of the Apache chief who would decide her fate. Neither she nor the stoic warrior could imagine how the children in her womb would forever unite two worlds, locked in generations of hatred. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Arizona Territory, 1874. The sun descended with deliberate cruelty over the barren landscape, casting long shadows across the cracked earth and sparse vegetation. Sarah Thornton pressed a hand against her swollen belly, feeling the child within shift restlessly, as if sensing the growing tension in the air. At 19, her face still held the softness of youth, though her blue eyes carried a determination forged through the hardships of the westward journey. "We should make camp soon, Thomas," she called to her husband, who rode ahead on horseback, scouting the trail. Her voice carried on the dry wind, mingling with the creaking of wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the oxen pulling their modest belongings across the unforgiving terrain. Thomas Thornton turned in his saddle, the setting sun illuminating his bearded face. He smiled with the confidence of a man who believed in the promise of a new beginning. "Just over that ridge, darling. The others are waiting for us." The wagon train had separated earlier that day, a decision that seemed practical at the time. The main group continued along the established trail, while a smaller contingent, including the Thorntons, followed a shortcut suggested by their guide. 5 wagons in total, carrying families bound by the shared dream of fertile land and new opportunities in the Western Territories. Sarah adjusted her position on the hard wooden seat, seeking relief for her aching back. 8 months into her pregnancy, the journey had become increasingly difficult, but she never complained. Thomas had promised her a home of their own before the baby arrived, a real home with walls to keep out the dust and windows to let in the morning light. "Water's running low," observed Mr. Jenkins from the wagon behind theirs. "Hope that guide of yours knows what he's talking about, Thornton." Thomas nodded with assurance. "He's traveled this route before. Says there's a creek just beyond." The shot rang out with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, cutting Thomas's words short. For a moment, Sarah thought it might be a hunter, or perhaps one of their own companions firing at a coyote. But Thomas's expression changed in an instant, his eyes widening with alarm. "Bandits!" someone shouted from behind. "Take cover!" Before Sarah could react, Thomas was beside their wagon, his rifle in hand. "Get down, Sarah. Stay low." More shots followed, a chaotic percussion accompanied by shouts and the frightened whinnying of horses. Sarah slid from the seat, crouching awkwardly behind the wagon's wooden side, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might harm the baby. She could see little from her position, just dust clouds and the blur of movement as men on horseback circled their small caravan. "Your valuables, all of them," a rough voice demanded. "Nobody needs to die today." Thomas stood his ground, rifle raised. "We've got women and children here. Back off and we can talk." Sarah wanted to call out to him, to beg him not to be brave, but fear had stolen her voice. She watched in horror as riders emerged from the surrounding brush, their faces masked with bandanas, guns gleaming in the fading light. Everything happened too quickly after that. The exchange of gunfire, the screams, the shattering of glass and splintering of wood. Sarah saw Thomas fall, a dark stain spreading across his chest. She heard herself scream then, a primal sound that tore from her throat as she tried to reach him. Rough hands pulled her back. "Stay down, Mrs. Thornton." It was Jenkins, attempting to shield her as bullets whizzed overhead. The attack couldn't have lasted more than 10 minutes, but to Sarah, it stretched into an eternity. When the shooting finally stopped, the bandits descended upon the wagons like vultures, ransacking trunks and boxes, taking anything of value: money, jewelry, tools, weapons. "Eject the bodies," one of them ordered, his voice cold and methodical. Sarah remained hidden, Jenkins's body now motionless beside her. She pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle her sobs, knowing that any sound might betray her location. Through a gap in the wagon's side, she could see Thomas lying face up on the ground, his eyes open but unseeing, fixed on the darkening sky. When the bandits finally departed, the silence was more terrifying than the chaos that preceded it. Sarah waited, counting her ragged breaths until she was certain they were gone. Then, on trembling legs, she emerged from her hiding place. The scene before her was one of devastation. Wagons overturned, possessions scattered, bodies lying still in the reddish dirt. She stumbled toward Thomas, falling to her knees beside him. "Thomas," she whispered, touching his face, still warm despite the growing chill of evening. "Please, Thomas." But there would be no response, no reassurance, no promised home. As night fell over the Arizona desert, Sarah Thornton sat beside her husband's body, one hand on his chest and the other cradling her unborn child. Shock had replaced fear, leaving her numb and disoriented. The other members of their small party were either dead or had fled during the attack. She was alone now, miles from any settlement, with only the coyotes' distant howls to acknowledge her grief. Chief Nakohe moved through the desert landscape like a shadow, his steps deliberate and silent against the rocky terrain. At 45, his face was etched with lines of wisdom and hardship, each wrinkle a testament to the struggles his people had endured. The rising sun cast an amber glow across his weathered features as he tracked a deer through the brush, his eyes missing nothing, not the bent twig, the displaced pebble, or the faint impression in the sandy soil. Behind him, two younger warriors followed with equal stealth. Makya, his sister's son, carried a bow fashioned from mesquite wood, while Tarek held a rifle acquired through trades with Mexican merchants. They were hunting not just for themselves, but for the entire band camped in the valley below, where families awaited their return. Nakohe raised his hand suddenly, halting their advance. His nostrils flared as the wind shifted, carrying with it an unfamiliar scent. Smoke mixed with something else, something that did not belong to the desert. "What is it, Uncle?" Makya whispered, his hand instinctively tightening around his bow. "A white man's fire," Nakohe replied, his voice low and measured. "But strange, not moving, dead fire." The three hunters changed direction, moving toward the source with heightened caution. The Apache had maintained an uneasy peace with the nearby settlements over the past season, but trust was fragile, easily shattered by misunderstandings or the actions of reckless individuals on either side. They crested a ridge and looked down into a small ravine. Below them lay the remnants of violence, overturned wagons, scattered belongings, and bodies half covered by the night's thin layer of drifting sand. Nakohe's expression remained stoic, but his eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. "Bandits," Tarek muttered, pointing to tracks leading away from the site. "Not soldiers, not our people," Nakohe nodded in agreement. The pattern of the attack was familiar. The systematic looting, the abandoned victims, Mexican or American outlaws preying on vulnerable travelers, was becoming increasingly common in these territories where law existed mostly in name. "We should leave," Makya suggested, tension evident in his voice. "If white soldiers come, they will blame us for this." It was a valid concern. Nakohe had seen it happen before. Apache blamed for crimes they did not commit. Retribution falling on innocent families. treaties broken over false accusations. Yet something held him in place, a feeling he could not immediately identify. "Search for survivors," he ordered, descending into the ravine with careful steps. They moved among the wagons, examining the bodies with respectful distance. 5 dead men, their possessions stripped, their weapons taken. Nakohe was about to signal their departure when a soft sound caught his attention, a moan so faint it might have been the wind shifting through the broken wagon canvas. Following the sound, he approached what remained of the largest wagon. Its side was splintered with bullet holes, its contents strewn across the ground. There, partially hidden beneath a fallen trunk, he found her. The white woman lay curled on her side, her dress stained with dust and dried blood. Her face was young despite the exhaustion etched into it, her skin pallid in the morning light. But what caused Nakohe to pause was the unmistakable swell of her belly. She carried a child, and from the size, it would come soon. She opened her eyes as his shadow fell across her, revealing irises of startling blue. Fear flashed across her face, her body tensing as she instinctively raised an arm to protect her unborn child. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked from thirst. "Please don't." Nakohe removed his knife from his belt slowly, and the woman's eyes widened in terror. But instead of advancing toward her, he knelt and cut a strip of fabric from his own shirt, then reached for a water skin at his side. He dampened the cloth and offered it to her, his movements deliberately gentle. "Water," he said in English, one of the few words he had learned through necessary negotiations with white settlers. Hesitantly, she took the cloth, pressing it to her cracked lips. Her eyes never left his face, confusion replacing fear as she realized his intention. "Makya, Tarak," Nakohe called to his companions, who approached warily. "She lives." "The child also." "What will you do with her?" Tarak asked in their language, his tone carrying disapproval. "She is not our concern." Nakohe studied the woman's face, her silent plea, the exhaustion in her eyes, the protective way her hands cradled her belly even in her weakened state. He thought of his own wife, lost in childbirth many winters ago, and of the daughter who had not survived her mother. Some pains transcended the boundaries between peoples. "To leave her is to kill her," he replied simply. "And the child. The white men's troubles are not ours," Makya argued, though without conviction. "Their women are not our responsibility." Nakohe's gaze remained fixed on the pregnant woman, who watched their exchange with apprehension, clearly unable to understand their words, but aware that her fate was being decided. "Today, she is our responsibility," Nakohe decided, his tone indicating the end of discussion. "Help me lift her." As they carefully raised the woman from the ground, she whispered something, a name perhaps, or a prayer. Nakohe could not understand her words, but he recognized the universal language of desperation and gratitude in her trembling voice. Together, they began the journey back to their encampment, carrying with them a decision that would challenge both their traditions and their future. The journey to the Apache encampment was a blur of pain and disorientation for Sarah. Carried on a makeshift stretcher fashioned from blankets and branches, she drifted in and out of consciousness, the trauma of the previous day's events and her physical condition taking their toll. When lucid, she caught glimpses of the changing landscape, rocky outcroppings giving way to scattered juniper trees, then to a hidden valley nestled between protective ridges. As they approached the village, Sarah's heart raced with renewed fear. She had heard stories of Apache raids since childhood, tales whispered around campfires about the fierce warriors who showed no mercy to settlers encroaching on their lands. Yet the man who had found her, the one the others clearly respected, had shown her kindness when he could have easily left her to die, or worse. The first faces she saw as they entered the camp were those of curious children who ran alongside the stretcher, their dark eyes wide with wonder at the sight of a white woman. Behind them came the adults, women pausing in their work, men gathering with expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. "Nakohe," one of the elders called out, his voice sharp with questioning. "What is this you bring to us?" Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the tone needed no translation. She curled protectively around her belly, wincing as a cramp seized her lower back. Nakohe responded with measured words, his hands occasionally gesturing towards Sarah's pregnant form. The exchange continued for several minutes, voices rising and falling like the wind. Finally, an older woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward, silencing the debate with a single raised hand. She approached Sarah, kneeling beside the stretcher to examine her more closely. Her fingers were gentle as they pressed against Sarah's forehead, checking for fever, then moved to her wrist, feeling the pulse that raced beneath the skin. "Kayana," Nakohe said, introducing the woman. "Medicine woman," he added in halting English, tapping his chest and then pointing to Kiana. Sarah nodded weakly, understanding dawning through her fear. "The baby," she whispered, placing both hands on her swollen abdomen. "Please." Kiana seemed to understand without words. She spoke rapidly to several younger women who hurried away, returning with water and what appeared to be herbs wrapped in leaves. Under Kiana's direction, they carefully transported Sarah to a wickiup at the edge of the settlement, a dome-shaped dwelling covered with brush and animal hides. Inside, it was surprisingly cool and clean. A bed of soft hides had been prepared, and Sarah found herself lowered onto it with unexpected tenderness. Nakohe remained outside, but Kiana and two younger women stayed, offering water and using gestures to communicate their intentions before touching her. As they helped her remove her dirt-encrusted dress, replacing it with a loose garment of soft deerskin, Sarah's initial terror began to subside. These women, despite the divide of language and generations of conflict, were treating her with the same care she might have received from her own mother or sisters. Their hands were gentle as they bathed the dust from her face and arms, their expressions showing concern rather than malice. One of the younger women, who couldn't have been much older than Sarah herself, pointed to her own chest. "Adzilla," she said, then pointed to the other woman. "Ah, Talasi, Sarah," she responded, touching her own chest. Then placing her hand on her belly, she added, "My baby." Adzilla smiled, revealing a warmth that transcended their differences. She mimicked rocking an infant in her arms, then held up 7 fingers, followed by a gesture that seemed to ask a question. Sarah understood. 8, she corrected, holding up 8 fingers. 8 months. Kiana examined Sarah more thoroughly then, her experienced hands gently probing the contours of her abdomen. Her expression grew serious as she felt the position of the child within. She spoke to Adzilla, who left the wickiup briefly, returning with what appeared to be tea brewed from aromatic herbs. As the day progressed, Sarah observed the life of the camp through the open doorway of her shelter. Children played games with stones and sticks. Women worked at cooking fires or scraped hides stretched on frames. Men repaired weapons or returned from hunting parties. It was a life entirely different from hers, yet the patterns of family and community were recognizable enough to provide a strange comfort. By evening, word of the white woman had spread throughout the encampment. Some came to the wickiup's entrance just to look at her, their expressions revealing curiosity rather than the hatred she had feared. Nakohe returned once, speaking briefly with Kiana before nodding respectfully to Sarah and departing. As darkness fell, bringing with it the chill of the desert night, Sarah lay awake on her bed of furs, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Apache village, drums beating softly in the distance, the murmur of voices around campfires, coyotes calling to one another from the surrounding hills. She thought of Thomas, his body left unburied in the ravine, and tears slid silently down her cheeks. The child within her kicked strongly, as if sensing her distress and offering reassurance of continued life. Sarah placed her hand over the movement, a sense of resolve growing within her alongside her grief. She would survive this, for her child, for Thomas's memory, for herself. And somehow, she would find a way to repay the unexpected mercy shown by people she had been taught to fear. Days passed, blending together in Sarah's mind as she adjusted to the rhythm of life within the Apache encampment. Each morning, Adzilla brought her fresh water and a porridge made from ground corn mixed with wild berries. Each afternoon, Kiana checked her condition, nodding with satisfaction as she felt the position of the baby. And each evening, the sounds of the village lulled her into an exhausted sleep, her dreams haunted by Thomas's face and the violence she had witnessed. By the fifth day, Sarah was strong enough to sit outside the wickiup, watching the daily activities of the camp with growing fascination. She observed the women grinding seeds between stones, weaving baskets from yucca fibers, and preparing food with methods she had never seen before. Children occasionally approached, touching her pale hair with wonder before running away giggling. Adzilla became her constant companion and reluctant teacher. The young Apache woman seemed to have appointed herself Sarah's guardian, and through a combination of gestures, drawings in the dirt, and repeated attempts at each other's languages, they began to communicate in rudimentary ways. "This moccasin," Adzilla said one afternoon, holding up a beautifully beaded leather shoe. Her English was heavily accented, but increasingly comprehensible. "Moccasin," Sarah repeated, running her fingers over the intricate pattern. "It's beautiful." Adzilla pointed to Sarah's swollen feet, then to the moccasins, raising her eyebrows in question. Sarah nodded gratefully. Her own shoes had been practically destroyed during the attack and subsequent journey, and her feet had grown too swollen for them anyway. Adzilla helped her put on the soft leather footwear, which provided immediate relief. These small kindnesses made Sarah's situation bearable, but she remained acutely aware of the divided opinions regarding her presence. Some, like Nakohe and Kiana, treated her with dignity and compassion. Others maintained a cold distance, their disapproving glances communicating what words could not. One warrior in particular, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, made no attempt to hide his hostility. Sarah learned from Adzilla that his name was Hanska, and that he had lost his wife and son to white soldiers in a raid the previous winter. "He say you danger," Adzilla explained hesitantly one evening as they watched Hanska arguing with Nakohe across the camp. "Say white people come for you." Sarah understood his fear all too well. If search parties from the nearest settlement discovered her living among the Apache, they might assume she had been taken captive rather than rescued. Such misunderstandings had sparked bloody conflicts before. "I would tell them the truth," Sarah insisted, though she knew her words meant little. The truth was often the first casualty in the conflicts between settlers and native peoples. The tension came to a head during a council gathering held 7 days after Sarah's arrival. Though she was not permitted to attend, she could hear the raised voices from her wickiup, Hanska's deep rumble recognizable even in a language she didn't understand. Later, Nakohe visited her, his expression grave. He sat cross-legged at the entrance to her shelter, studying her face before speaking. "Some want you go," he said, his English improving through their limited interactions. "Say dangerous, keep white woman." Sarah nodded, her hand moving to her belly. "I understand. But where would I go?" The nearest settlement was at least 3 days. Travel on horseback, impossible in her condition. Nakohe seemed to follow her thoughts. "You stay until child comes," he declared, his tone suggesting this was his decision rather than the council's consensus. "Then we see." Relief washed over Sarah, followed immediately by concern. "And those who disagree, Hanska." "Hanska obeys me," Nakohe stated simply, though a shadow crossed his weathered features. "But you stay in camp. No wonder." "No go far." It was both protection and restriction, Sarah realized. For her own safety as much as the tribe's, she was to remain hidden from any passing white travelers who might misinterpret her presence. That night, a full moon rose over the encampment, casting silver light across the village. Sarah sat at the threshold of her wickiup, unable to sleep as the baby shifted restlessly within her. Something felt different, a heaviness in her lower back, a tightening that came and went like waves. Adzilla noticed her discomfort and summoned Kiana, who examined Sarah with increased attention. The medicine woman's eyes widened slightly as she felt Sarah's abdomen, and she spoke rapidly to Adzilla. "What is it?" Sarah asked, a flutter of panic rising in her chest. "There is something wrong." Adzilla shook her head, a mixture of excitement and apprehension on her face. "Baby come," she explained. "Moon time for baby." Sarah gasped as a stronger contraction seized her. It was too early. She had calculated at least 3 more weeks until her time, but the baby had its own plans, apparently unmoved by its mother's circumstances. Kiana was already gathering her medicines and sending women to collect water and clean hides. The news spread quickly through the camp, and soon a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance from Sarah's wickiup, their faces solemn in the moonlight. Among them stood Nakohe, his expression unreadable as he watched the preparations. Beside him, Hanska's scarred face reflected both suspicion and something else, perhaps a reluctant recognition of the universal significance of new life, regardless of its origins. As another contraction gripped her, stronger than the last, Sarah gripped Adzilla's hand and prayed silently, not just for herself and her child, but for the people who had taken her in, despite every reason not to. Whatever happened this night would change all their lives forever. The pain came in waves, each one stronger than the last, washing over Sarah like desert flash floods. Inside the wickiup, transformed now into a sacred space of birth, 5 women moved with practiced efficiency. Kiana knelt at Sarah's feet, her ancient hands steady and sure. Adzilla supported Sarah's back, murmuring encouragement in a mixture of Apache and broken English. 3 other women, elders whose silver-streaked hair gleamed in the firelight, arranged herbs, heated water, and prepared soft rabbit skins to receive the newborn. Outside, the full moon hung impossibly large in the night sky, casting everything in silver light. The men of the tribe had withdrawn to the opposite side of the encampment, as was their custom during childbirth, but Nakohe remained within calling distance, standing like a sentinel at the edge of the firelight. "Breathe," Adzilla instructed, demonstrating with deep inhalations. "Like wind through canyon." Sarah tried to follow, but another contraction seized her, forcing a cry from her lips. This was nothing like the birth she had imagined, surrounded by neighbor women in a proper bed, perhaps with a doctor from the nearest town if there had been time. Instead, she labored on a bed of furs in a stranger's dwelling, among women whose language she barely understood. Yet there was something primal and reassuring about their presence. These women knew birth intimately, not as a medical procedure, but as a fundamental power that connected all women across time and culture. Their hands were skilled, their voices soothing, their movements confident. "Child soon," Kiana announced, her weathered face revealing rare emotion as she checked Sarah's progress. "Strong child. Fighting to come." The labor intensified as midnight approached. Sarah lost all sense of time, existing only in the space between contractions, gathering strength for the next wave. The women sang softly, a rhythmic chant that seemed to pulse with the contractions, giving her something to focus on besides the pain. "I can't," Sarah gasped after a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't do this." Adzila gripped her hand firmly. "You can. You strong like mountain. Child needs you strong now." Kiana prepared a tea brewed from special herbs, helping Sarah drink between contractions. Its bitter taste spread warmth through her body, lending her strength she didn't know she possessed. As the moon reached its zenith, Kiana's expression changed. "Now," she commanded. "Child comes now." What followed was a blur of sensation, unbearable pressure, a burning stretch, the urge to push overwhelming everything else. Sarah bore down with all her remaining strength, the women's voices rising around her like a tide, carrying her forward. "Head!" Adzila exclaimed. "See head!" With one final, tremendous effort, Sarah felt the release as her child slid into Kiana's waiting hands. The cry that followed, strong, indignant, alive, was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "Son," Kiana announced, placing the squirming, wet infant on Sarah's chest. "Strong son." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she beheld her child. Perfect tiny fingers, a shock of dark hair, skin flushed pink with life. Thomas's son, their son, she had done it. But the relief was short-lived. Another contraction gripped her, unexpected and powerful. "What's happening?" she gasped, alarmed. Kiana's eyes widened momentarily before her experienced hands returned to their position. "Another," she said simply. "Two spirits." "Twins," Sarah whispered in disbelief. No one had suspected, not even her. Her belly had been large, yes, but she'd attributed that to her small frame. The second birth came faster than the first, her body already knowing the way. With 3 strong pushes, another cry joined the first, equally vigorous but somehow different in tone. "Another son," Kiana announced, but her voice held a note of wonder that drew Sarah's attention. When the second child was placed beside his brother on her chest, Sarah understood the medicine woman's reaction. While the first boy had Thomas's fair complexion and rounded features, this second child was markedly different. His skin was several shades darker, his hair straight and black, his eyes, when they briefly opened, revealing a shape that echoed those of the women attending his birth. A murmur ran through the wickiup as the women exchanged glances. Adzila's hand trembled slightly as she helped clean the second infant. "How can this be?" one of the elder women whispered in Apache, the confusion in her tone transcending language barriers. Kiana silenced her with a sharp glance, continuing her work with the afterbirth as if nothing unusual had occurred. But her eyes, when they met Sarah's, held questions that neither woman had words to express. Outside, word of the twin birth had reached the men. Nakohe approached the wickiup, stopping at a respectful distance until Adzila emerged with news. "2 boys," she announced, her voice carrying in the night stillness. "Healthy." "Strong." Nakohe nodded, his expression revealing nothing, but when Adzila spoke again, her voice lower, his stoic facade cracked slightly. "The second child," she said in their language, "he carries the blood of the people." Hanska pushed forward from the gathered men, his scarred face twisted in disbelief. "Impossible," he hissed. "The white woman tries to trick us." Nakohe raised a hand for silence. "I will see," he decided. Inside the wickiup, Sarah held her sons with trembling arms, overwhelmed by their miraculous presence. She had noticed the second boy's distinctive features, but was too exhausted, too overcome with relief and joy to fully comprehend their significance. When Nakohe ducked into the dwelling, his tall frame filling the entrance, Sarah instinctively clutched her babies closer. The chief's eyes fell on the infants, studying them with an intensity that made her heart race. After a long moment, he spoke a single word in Apache, one Sarah didn't understand but recognized from the reverential way it was uttered. "Ihawi," he said. "Twin spirits." Dawn broke over the Apache encampment, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The news of the twin birth had spread through the village like wildfire, carrying with it whispers of mystery and ancient beliefs. Sarah slept fitfully, waking at each tiny sound from her newborns, who lay swaddled in soft rabbit skins beside her bed of furs. Outside the wickiup, a council had convened. Elders sat in a circle around the central fire, their faces grave as they discussed the unprecedented situation. Nakohe presided, his posture erect despite having remained awake through the night. "It is a sign," declared Hakatomema, the oldest of the spiritual leaders, his voice cracking with age but firm with conviction. "The ancestors have spoken through these children," Hanska snorted, unconvinced. "Or the white woman has lain with one of our men. A betrayal of both her people and ours." Murmurs followed his accusation, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably at the suggestion. Nakohe raised his hand for silence. "The woman was with child when we found her. Her belly was already full with life. This is known. And her husband newly dead," added Kiana, who had joined the council after tending to Sarah and the infants. "The children were conceived long before she came to us. Then how do you explain the second child?" Hanska demanded. "No white woman bears a child with the features of the people unless she has lain with one of us." Kiana's eyes, sharp despite her years, fixed on Hanska. "There are mysteries in this world beyond your understanding, Hanska. The Great Spirit works in ways we cannot always comprehend." The discussion continued as the sun climbed higher, opinions divided between those who saw the birth as a supernatural omen and those who suspected deception. Throughout it all, Nakohe remained thoughtful, speaking little but observing much. Inside the wickiup, Sarah woke fully to find Adzilla changing the swaddling cloths of her sons. The young Apache woman smiled when she noticed Sarah watching. "They strong," Adzilla said, her voice warm with admiration. "Both eat well." Sarah pushed herself up on one elbow, wincing at the soreness that permeated her body. "Thank you for helping with them," she said softly, "and for everything during the birth." Adzilla nodded, then hesitated, her expression growing serious. "Many talk about second son. Many questions." Sarah's gaze fell on her twins, so different yet so equally hers. The first boy had a dusting of light brown hair and Thomas's cleft chin. The second had straight black hair and distinct features that undeniably resembled those of the people who had taken her in. "I don't understand it myself," she admitted, touching the darker infant's cheek gently. "But they are both my sons." Both Thomas's sons. Adzilla looked uncertain, but didn't press further. Instead, she helped Sarah sit up completely and brought her a wooden bowl filled with a nourishing broth. As Sarah ate, Nakohe entered the wickiup, ducking his tall frame through the low entrance. He nodded respectfully to Sarah before turning to Adzilla and speaking briefly in Apache. The young woman gathered some items and left, casting a reassuring glance at Sarah before departing. Alone with the chief and her newborns, Sarah felt a flutter of apprehension. She had no idea what the tribe's customs might dictate in such an unusual situation. Nakohe sat cross-legged near the entrance, his eyes moving between Sarah and the twins. After a long silence, he spoke, choosing his words carefully in his limited English. "You know your husband's family, his people before him?" The question surprised Sarah. "Yes, somewhat." Thomas came from Boston originally. His father was a merchant who traded with Europe. His mother died when he was young. Nakohe nodded slowly. "And before, his grandfather, grandmother?" Sarah frowned, trying to recall conversations from early in their marriage. "His maternal grandfather was a sea captain, I believe. He traveled widely, including to Spanish territories," Thomas once mentioned. A memory surfaced suddenly. Thomas had a miniature portrait of him. He looked quite different from Thomas, darker complexion, black hair. Thomas said he took after his mother's family. Something shifted in Nakohe's expression, a recognition that made Sarah's heart beat faster. "Many winters ago," he began, his deep voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller, "Apache people trade with Spanish people. Sometimes peace, sometimes war. Some Apache taken to Spanish lands. Some Spanish live with Apache." Understanding dawned slowly. "You think Thomas might have had Apache ancestry through his mother's line?" Nakohe spread his hands in a gesture that suggested possibility rather than certainty. "Blood remembers. Even when mind forgets, blood speaks across generations." Sarah looked down at her second son, seeing him with new eyes. If what Nakohe suggested was true, this child hadn't appeared miraculously with Apache features. He had simply inherited traits that had lain dormant in Thomas's bloodline, perhaps for generations. "What will happen to us now?" she asked quietly, the question encompassing far more than just the immediate future. Nakohe's gaze was steady, his voice resolute when he replied, "The council speaks still. But I believe these children are a message from the spirits, a bridge between your people and mine." 2 weeks after the twins' birth, life in the Apache encampment had settled into a new rhythm. Sarah regained her strength gradually, learning to care for 2 infants with the help of Adzilla and other women who had overcome their initial suspicion. The babies thrived, their distinct personalities emerging, the first twin alert and vocal, the second more observant and calm. Sarah had named them William and James, William after her father and James after Thomas's brother. The Apache, however, had their own names for the boys. The first they called Tahdu, meaning wind, for his restless energy. The second they named Ahanu, he laughs, because of the way his eyes crinkled when content. This dual naming seemed fitting for children who straddled 2 worlds, and Sarah embraced both sets of names, understanding the importance of honoring both parts of their heritage. On this particular morning, as Sarah sat outside her wickiup nursing William while Adzilla cradled James, an unusual stillness fell over the camp. The children who had been playing nearby suddenly quieted, and women paused in their work, heads turning toward the edge of the settlement where 3 warriors had appeared, returning from their patrol with urgent expressions. They went directly to Nakohe's dwelling, speaking in rapid Apache too complex for Sarah to follow. But she recognized certain words that sent a chill through her body. White men. Soldiers. Searching. Adzilla's face tightened with concern. "They come," she said simply, her eyes meeting Sarah's. "White men search for dead wagons, find bodies." Sarah's heart raced. It was inevitable, she supposed. The settlement would have sent search parties when the wagon train failed to arrive. They would have found the site of the attack, counted the bodies, and noticed one missing, a pregnant woman. Within minutes, Nakohe emerged from his wickiup, followed by Hanska and other tribal leaders. His face was composed but grave as he crossed the clearing to where Sarah sat. White men with guns search valley, he informed her, his English deliberate and clear. Many men, they find dead husband. Now look for you. Sarah swallowed hard, shifting William to her shoulder. What will you do? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. If armed settlers discovered Sarah living among the Apache, especially with newborn infants, misunderstandings could quickly escalate to violence. Yet if the Apache attempted to hide her or prevent contact, it would only confirm the settlers' worst suspicions about her fate. Nakohe considered her for a long moment. What would you do? He asked finally, surprising her with the question. Sarah thought of the settlement she and Thomas had been traveling to join, people she'd never met but who were to have been her neighbors, her community. She thought of the Apache who had saved her life and helped deliver her sons, who were now as much a part of her story as her own people. I would tell them the truth, she said firmly. That you found me after the attack, that you saved me and my children when you could have left us to die. Truth not always believed between our peoples, Nakohe observed. Then let me speak to them, Sarah insisted, a plan forming in her mind. Let me be the one to meet them first. With my children, they'll see that we're safe, that we've been treated with kindness. Nakohe's eyes revealed nothing, but he nodded slowly. Bold plan. Dangerous maybe. More dangerous to hide, Sarah countered. If they find us by accident, they'll assume the worst. As they spoke, one of the scouts who had just returned approached, speaking urgently to Nakohe. The chief's expression darkened. They close, he told Sarah. Camp in valley beyond ridge. We'll reach here by midday tomorrow, if follow same path. Decisions needed to be made quickly. Nakohe called for the council to gather, while Kiana and Adzilla helped Sarah prepare for the coming encounter. They selected her cleanest dress, mended now and supplemented with soft deerskin moccasins. They helped her wash her hair and braided it simply in the style of her own people rather than in Apache fashion. That evening, as the council deliberated, Sarah sat outside her wickiup, watching the stars appear one by one above the desert landscape. Her twins slept peacefully beside her, unaware of the tensions surrounding their existence. Nakohe joined her after the council dispersed, settling on the ground nearby with the fluid grace that belied his years. Council agrees, he said after a contemplative silence. You speak to your people first. Show them children. Tell them of our help. Relief washed over Sarah, but it was tempered by new anxiety. And if they don't believe me? If they still see your people as a threat? Nakohe's weathered face revealed a rare smile. Then we show them truth is stronger than fear. He gestured to the sleeping infants. These sons, they already break old barriers, they already change what is possible. The chief rose to leave but paused, looking down at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Tomorrow, two worlds meet. Good or bad, nothing stays same after. As he walked away, Sarah gazed at her sleeping sons, one fair, one dark, both miracles in their own way. Nakohe was right. These children, through the simple fact of their existence, had already changed her world irrevocably. Perhaps they could change others' worlds too. Dawn had barely broken when Nakohe's scouts reported the search party's approach. 20 men on horseback, some in the uniforms of the territorial militia, others in civilian clothing, all armed and moving with purposeful caution through the valley that led to the Apache encampment. Sarah stood at the edge of the settlement, her heart pounding against her ribs. She wore her mended dress, her hair pulled back in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. In her arms, she cradled both twins, wrapped in soft deerskin blankets adorned with subtle Apache designs. Behind her, hidden among the rocks and brush that surrounded the camp, Nakohe and several warriors maintained a protective watch, bows and rifles at the ready should the encounter turn hostile. The rest of the tribe had withdrawn deeper into the camp, though Sarah knew many eyes were watching from wickiups and behind stone outcroppings. "And remember," Adzilla had whispered before retreating, "speak with strength, show no fear." Now, as Sarah stood alone on the exposed trail, those words echoed in her mind. She focused on controlling her breathing, on the solid weight of her sons in her arms, on the truth she needed to convey. The riders appeared around a bend in the trail, dust rising from their horses' hooves. The man in the lead, a graying, broad-shouldered figure in a faded blue uniform, raised his hand sharply when he spotted her, bringing the column to an abrupt halt. For a moment, nobody moved. The distance between them, perhaps 30 yards, seemed to stretch into an unbridgeable chasm of misunderstanding and suspicion. Then Sarah took a deliberate step forward. "My name is Sarah Thornton," she called, her voice stronger than she had expected. "My husband was Thomas Thornton. We were traveling with Jenkins, a wagon train, when bandits attacked 2 weeks ago." The leader nudged his horse forward cautiously, his weathered face revealing shock and disbelief. "Mrs. Thornton, we found the wagons, the bodies. We thought you were dead or—" His eyes darted to the landscape beyond her, searching for signs of the Apache he clearly suspected were nearby. "No, I was wounded in the attack," Sarah continued steadily. "I would have died if I hadn't been found and cared for by the people who live here." The man's expression hardened with suspicion. "You're saying Apaches found you and just took you in?" His hand rested meaningfully on the pistol at his hip. "That's exactly what I'm saying, Captain Everett. Captain James Everett, Arizona Territorial Militia." He studied her carefully, his eyes falling to the bundles in her arms. "And those are—" "My sons," Sarah replied, shifting slightly so the infants' faces were visible. "Born here 12 days ago. Twins." Murmurs ran through the group of men behind Captain Everett. One rider, younger than the others, with a shock of red hair beneath his wide-brimmed hat, leaned forward in his saddle. "Would, ma'am, are you being forced to say these things? Are you in danger? Just give us a sign if—" "I am not being coerced," Sarah interrupted firmly. "I am alive because Chief Nakohe chose compassion over indifference. My sons are alive because the women of this tribe used their knowledge to safely deliver them when no doctor was available." Captain Everett dismounted slowly, handing his reins to the man beside him. He approached Sarah with measured steps, his eyes never leaving her face, as if searching for signs of deception or duress. "Mrs. Thornton," he said quietly when he stood before her, "we've been searching for survivors for days. Found your husband's body, gave him a proper burial." His voice softened slightly. "I'm truly glad you survived, but you need to understand how this looks to us. These people—" He gestured vaguely toward the encampment. "Saved my life," Sarah finished for him. "And if you want peace in this territory, Captain Everett, you'll listen carefully to what I have to say." Something in her tone, perhaps the unmistakable ring of truth, or simply the authority that motherhood had granted her, gave the captain pause. He nodded once, reluctantly. "I'm listening." "The attack was carried out by bandits, white men wearing masks who spoke English and Spanish. They killed my husband and the others, took everything of value. I was wounded and hidden when the Apache hunting party found me the next day." She shifted the twins in her arms, and William began to fuss. "They could have left me there. Instead, they brought me here, tended my wounds, gave me shelter. When my time came earlier than expected, their medicine woman delivered my sons safely." Captain Everett's eyes fell to the babies again, and this time he noticed what Sarah had been waiting for him to see, the distinct features of James, his darker skin and black hair unmistakable even to a casual observer. "The second child," he said, his voice dropping. "And he takes after his father's mother's family," Sarah explained, the story she and Nakohe had constructed ready on her lips. Thomas's maternal grandfather was of mixed heritage, though Thomas himself never acknowledged it openly. The captain's brow furrowed as he processed this information, clearly struggling to reconcile his preconceptions with the evidence before him. "Captain Everett," Sarah said, seizing the moment of uncertainty, "I would like to introduce you to Chief Nakohe, who has been waiting patiently to ensure my safety during this meeting." She turned slightly, calling out in the few words of Apache she had mastered. From the rocks behind her, Nakohe emerged, tall and dignified, his hands empty of weapons, but his presence commanding respect. The silence that followed Nakohe's appearance stretched taut as a bowstring. Captain Everett's hand instinctively moved toward his pistol before he checked himself, eyes narrowing as he assessed the Apache chief. Behind him, his men shifted nervously in their saddles, rifles at the ready. Nakohe stood perfectly still, his weathered face impassive, but his eyes alert. He wore no war paint, carried no visible weapons, but his very presence radiated an authority that matched Everett's own. "Chief Nakohe," Sarah said into the silence, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This is Captain James Everett of the Arizona Territorial Militia." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then, with deliberate slowness, Nako raised his right hand in greeting. "Captain," he said, his deep voice accented but clear. "Welcome to our land." Everett's eyebrows rose slightly at the unexpected English. After a moment's hesitation, he inclined his head in a curt nod. "Chief," he acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral. "Mrs. Thornton has been telling us about your assistance." "She speaks truth," Nakohe replied simply. "We find her dying, we help." "This is our way, not the way most white folks would expect," Everett countered, though without open hostility. "There's been blood between our peoples." "Yes," Nakohe agreed, his gaze unwavering. "Much blood, on both sides." Another silence fell, heavy with the weight of history. Sarah looked between the two men, acutely aware that this moment balanced on a knife's edge. The twins stirred in her arms, and James began to whimper softly. Adzilla emerged from the shadows then, approaching with quiet dignity to stand beside Sarah. "Babies need quiet place," she said, offering her arms. "Sun too hot here." Sarah hesitated, sensing the symbolic importance of this moment. Entrusting her children to Adzilla in full view of the militia would be a powerful statement of her trust in the Apache. "Captain Everett," she said, "this is Adzilla. She helped deliver my sons and has cared for them as if they were her own kin. I'd like her to take them back to the shade while we continue our discussion." Everett's face revealed his internal conflict. The sight of a white woman willingly handing her infants to an Apache woman challenged everything he had been conditioned to believe. "Mrs. Thornton," he said quietly, "are you certain?" "I would trust Adzilla with my life, Captain," Sarah interrupted firmly. "I already have." With that, she carefully transferred the twins to Adzilla's waiting arms. The young Apache woman received them with practiced ease. murmuring soothing words as she carried them back toward the encampment. Something shifted in Everett's expression as he watched this exchange, a crack in the foundation of his preconceptions. After a moment, he turned back to Nakohe. "I think we have much to discuss, Chief. Perhaps we could sit and talk like civilized men." If Nakohe detected the unintended slight in Everett's choice of words, he gave no sign. Instead, he gestured toward a flat area nearby where logs had been positioned in a rough circle. "Please," he said, "sit. We talk." The negotiations that followed lasted into the afternoon. Initially, only Everett dismounted to join the conversation, while his men remained alert on their horses. But as hours passed with no sign of threat, tensions gradually eased. Water was brought, then food, simple fare of flatbread and dried meat, offered first to the captain, then to his men. Sarah sat between the two leaders, translating when necessary, clarifying points of misunderstanding, her presence a living bridge between worlds. She shared her story in greater detail, explaining how the Apache had tended her wounds, provided shelter, and ultimately helped deliver her sons safely. The twins themselves seemed to embody the possibility of coexistence, she concluded, watching comprehension dawn gradually in Everett's weathered face. "It's an extraordinary tale, Mrs. Thornton," the captain admitted, "and one that runs counter to everything I've been told about the Apache people." "Perhaps it is time for new stories," Nakohe suggested, his deep voice resonating with quiet dignity. "Stories without blood." As afternoon shadows lengthened, the conversation turned to practical matters. Everett explained that a new settlement was being established 15 miles to the west, Cooperville, named after the territory's deputy governor. Land was being parceled out to families willing to work it, with military protection promised against hostile elements. "I was to join that settlement," Sarah said, a complicated emotion threading through her voice. "Thomas and I, we had plans to build a life there." "The offer still stands," Everett told her. "There's a place for you and your boys. The settlement has several families, a small school being built, doctor visits once a month." Sarah glanced toward the Apache encampment, where Adzilla was visible walking with the twins, showing them to curious children who gathered around her. Something twisted in her chest, not quite pain, not quite longing, but a recognition that choices made now would shape not just her future but that of her sons. "And what of the Apache?" she asked, turning back to Everett. "Will there be peace between Cooperville and Chief Nakohe's people?" Everett shifted uncomfortably. "That's not entirely in my power to promise, Ma'am. There are treaties in place, but they're often complicated." "Not complicated," Nakohe corrected with gentle firmness. "Broken by your government, not by my people." Rather than bristling at the accusation, Everett surprised Sarah by nodding slowly. "There's truth in that," he acknowledged, "but there are good men trying to change things. I count myself among them." Nakohe studied the captain's face, seeming to search for deception and finding none. "And then perhaps we can make new agreement, small beginning, between your settlement and my band." "What sort of agreement?" Everett asked, caution in his tone, but also genuine interest. "Trading," Nakohe suggested. "Safe passage for both peoples on agreed paths, no weapons raised against each other." And his eyes moved to Sarah and then back to Everett. The woman and her sons free to move between both worlds. 4 months later, under an October sky painted with brush strokes of gold and crimson, Sarah stood on the porch of her small cabin at the eastern edge of Cooperville. From this vantage point, she could see both the growing settlement, now 23 structures strong, and the distant mesas where the Apache made their seasonal camp. The twins, robust at 5 months old, lay on a blanket at her feet, batting at wooden toys carved by both white and Apache hands. William, fair-haired and blue-eyed like his father, had developed a hearty laugh that could be heard across the settlement. James, with his darker features and thoughtful demeanor, watched the world with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "Mrs. Thornton," a voice called, drawing Sarah's attention to the road leading into town. Rebecca Miller, the blacksmith's wife, approached with a basket covered with checkered cloth. "Brought you some of those preserves you liked. Blackberry, fresh from the last batch." Sarah smiled warmly. "You're too kind, Mrs. Miller. Please, come sit for a moment." The two women settled on the porch steps, watching as a rider approached from the Eastern Trail, one of the Apache traders who now made regular journeys to Cooperville, bringing finely crafted leather goods, medicinal herbs, and occasionally game to exchange for flour, coffee, and metal tools. "Still can't quite get used to it," Mrs. Miller admitted, following Sarah's gaze. "My Henry would have shot an Apache on sight a year ago. Now he's trading horseshoes for the finest deerskin gloves he's ever owned." "People can change when given reason to," Sarah replied quietly, "on both sides." Her decision to establish her home in Cooperville while maintaining close ties with Nakohe's people had raised eyebrows initially. Some settlers had whispered behind closed doors about her divided loyalties and unusual attachment to the Apache. But as the seasons turned and the benefits of peaceful exchange became evident, those whispers had gradually faded. Captain Everett had been instrumental in facilitating the arrangement. True to his word, he had advocated for the informal treaty between the settlement and Nakohe's band, designating safe travel routes and establishing fair trading practices. The territorial governor had been skeptical, but ultimately pragmatic. One peaceful relationship in a region fraught with conflict was better than none. Sarah's unique position as intermediary had granted her a role she never expected, but found deeply fulfilling. Twice weekly, she traveled to the Apache encampment with her sons, bringing news from Cooperville and sometimes accompanying settlers interested in trading directly. On alternate days, she welcomed Apache visitors, most often Adzilla and the younger women, teaching them to read English while learning more of their language and customs in return. "They're coming for the ceremony tomorrow?" Mrs. Miller asked, nodding toward the twins. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, "Chief Nakohe and several elders, Adzilla and some of the women as well. The next day would mark an unprecedented event, a formal blessing ceremony for the twins, combining elements of Christian baptism and Apache naming rituals. Reverend Collins had been reluctant at first, but Sarah's quiet insistence that her sons deserved to know both sides of their heritage had eventually persuaded him. "Bold choice, Mrs. Miller observed, though without judgment. "Not everyone would have the courage." "It's not courage," Sarah corrected gently. "It's truth. My sons are born of both worlds. To deny either would be to deny part of who they are." After Mrs. Miller departed, Sarah attended to her daily chores, feeding the chickens gifted to her by neighbors, watering the small garden where she grew both European vegetables and native plants Kiana had taught her to cultivate. Through it all, the twins remained her constant companions, strapped to her back in a cradleboard when she needed both hands free, a practice she had adopted from the Apache women. As dusk approached, she heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats. Looking up from where she knelt in the garden, she saw Nakohe approaching on horseback, alone, except for a second horse trailing behind him. "Greetings, Sarah Thornton," he called as he dismounted with the fluid grace that belied his years. "Greetings, Chief Nakohe," she responded warmly, brushing soil from her hands as she rose to meet him. "Boo, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow's ceremony." Nakohe's weathered face creased in a rare smile as he approached the twins, who recognized him and responded with excited movements. "I bring gift," he explained, gesturing to the second horse, a gentle mare with a dappled coat, "for you and sons to visit our camp more easily." Emotion welled in Sarah's throat. The gift of a horse was significant, both practically valuable and symbolically meaningful. "It's beautiful," she managed, touching the mare's velvety nose. "But are you certain?" "Very certain," Nakohe replied, his dark eyes holding hers. "Bridge needs strong support on both sides." That evening, as twilight painted the desert in deepening shades of purple, Sarah sat on her porch with the chief, sharing a simple meal while the twins slept peacefully inside. Their conversation flowed easily now, their initial language barriers smoothed by months of regular interaction. "Tomorrow will be remembered," Nakohe observed, gazing toward the settlement where lanterns were being lit in windows. "Mere first time two peoples bless same children together. Do you think it will last?" Sarah asked, the question encompassing far more than just the ceremony. "This peace between your people and mine?" Nakohe considered her question with the thoughtfulness that characterized him. "Peace is like desert plant," he said finally, "needs constant tending, easily killed by carelessness. But with care, survives even hardest seasons." He looked toward the cabin where the twins slept. "Your sons will help tend this peace. They carry both worlds in their blood. They will understand what others cannot." The next morning dawned clear and bright. By midday, the entire settlement had gathered in the open area before the newly constructed church, a simple structure of rough-hewn logs with a wooden cross above its door. Beside Reverend Collins stood Hakatomema, the Apache's spiritual leader, his ancient face solemn, but his eyes bright with the significance of the occasion. Sarah, dressed in a blue calico dress with an Apache beaded necklace at her throat, held her sons before the assembled crowd. Settlers stood on one side, Apache visitors on the other, the physical arrangement a visual representation of the bridge being built between them. As Reverend Collins began the Christian blessing, sprinkling water on each child's forehead and invoking divine protection, Sarah's gaze moved across the gathered faces. She saw Captain Everett standing tall in his uniform, his expression reflecting both pride in this accomplishment and awareness of its fragility. She saw Adzilla, adorned in her finest garments, watching with barely contained emotion. And in the back, partially hidden by shadow, she glimpsed Hanska, his scarred face still wary, but his presence itself a concession to possibility. When the Christian portion concluded, Hakatomema stepped forward. In his gnarled hands, he held a small pouch of sacred herbs and 2 eagle feathers. Speaking in Apache, with Nakohe translating for the settlers, benefit, he called upon the spirits of earth and sky to guide these children of 2 worlds. "Etahdu and Ahanu," he proclaimed, using the Apache names given to the twins at birth. "May you walk in beauty. May you speak with truth. May you build bridges where others see only chasms." As the ceremony concluded, something remarkable happened. A settler child, the blacksmith's young daughter, stepped forward hesitantly, offering a carved wooden toy to one of the Apache children. After a moment's hesitation, the gift was accepted and shy smiles were exchanged. It was a small gesture, perhaps insignificant against the vast backdrop of historical conflict. But to Sarah, watching with her sons in her arms, it represented everything she had come to hope for, the possibility that the next generation might build upon this fragile beginning, might know each other as neighbors rather than enemies. "They will remember this day," Nakohe said quietly, coming to stand beside her as the two communities began to mingle cautiously, sharing food and tentative conversation. And so will others when they hear of it. Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion as she watched her twins, one fair, one dark, both equally loved, reach out their tiny hands toward a future that now held possibilities she had never imagined in those desperate hours after the attack. Two worlds, she murmured, but one sky above us all.